Alright, yeah! Thank God for fantasy football. I'm Buster Brown, and the show is called Redemption Rehab. Today we're taking a look at the Week 6 waiver wire report and those must-have players to help you fill out your lineup, starting with this guy. How about Tyrone Tracy Jr. of the New York Giants? He's a running back owned in 25% of all fantasy football leagues. He's the handcuff to Devin Singletary, who is hurt right now. Not sure when he's coming back, but Tyrone Tracy last week versus Seattle had 18 carries for 129 yards. He had one reception on 2 targets. He did split some playing time with another running back, Eric Gray, so keep an eye on Devin Singletary to see if he's coming back this week. Who else do we like? How about this running back? How about Tank Bigsby of the Jacksonville Jaguars? He's owned in 20% of fantasy football leagues. He's the handcuff to Travis Etienne. Last week, he had 13 carries for 101 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had one reception for 26 yards on 1 target. The starter is Travis Etienne. If he's healthy, he'll probably still be the starter. Who else do we like at running back? How about this guy down there in Miami, Jalen Wright? He's owned in 10% of fantasy football leagues. He's one of the 2 handcuffs to Devon Achane. Achane's hurt with a concussion, so he might not play this week. Last week, Jalen Wright had 13 carries for 86 yards. He also caught 4 passes for 46 yards on 8 targets. Keep an eye on this situation. Who else do we really like this week? How about these guys at wide receiver? We got to get ourselves some Juju Smith-Schuster from Kansas City. He's only owned in 5% of fantasy football leagues. Last week, he had 7 catches for 130 yards on 8 targets. Or how about Darnell Mooney of the Atlanta Falcons? He's owned in 60% of fantasy football leagues. We've been talking about him for weeks. That's why you should hit that subscribe button. Last week, he had 9 catches for 105 yards and 2 touchdowns on a whopping 16 targets. And another guy we've mentioned many times this year on Fantasy Football Redemption Rehab is Jalen Tolbert of the Dallas Cowboys. He's owned in 10% of fantasy football leagues. He had 7 catches for 87 yards and a touchdown on 10 targets. With the injury to Brandon Cooks, you might see Jalen Tolbert get some more playing time. Who else do we like? Well, I can tell you what, there's some other wide receivers you got to keep your eye on. How about this guy? How about Darius Slayton of the New York Giants? With the injuries to Malik Neighbors, who might not play this week, Darius Slayton's only owned in 5% of fantasy football leagues. He had 8 catches last week for 122 yards and a touchdown. We also like Wayndell Robinson on the same team. And a guy you want to keep on your radar, how about Michael Wilson of the Arizona Cardinals? He's owned in 15% of fantasy football leagues. Last week, he had 5 catches for 78 yards on 6 targets. And who else do we like? How about some of these guys at tight end? I mean, you always got to have a tight end. We've been talking about Tucker Kraft for weeks. If you'd have picked him up, you'd got you 20 points. Last week, he had 4 catches for 88 yards and 2 touchdowns. He plays for the Green Bay Packers. And a new guy that we're going to add to the list this week is Theo Johnson of the New York Giants. With Malik Neighbors out, Theo Johnson came in and had 5 catches for 48 yards on 5 targets versus Seattle. And Colby Parkinson of the Los Angeles Rams. We've been talking about him for a few weeks. Last week, he had 7 catches for 52 yards on 13 targets. Speaking of some guys you want to keep on your radar, maybe you need a quarterback. Last week, we told you about Joe Flacco for the Indianapolis Colts. Joe Flacco was 33 of 44 with 3 touchdowns. He had a quarterback rating of 121, and he ran the ball 3 times for 22 yards. Another quarterback we like this week that's only owned in 10% of fantasy football leagues is Daniel Jones of the New York Giants. Last week against Seattle, he was 23 of 34 for 2 touchdowns and had a quarterback rating of 110. And we've not mentioned this guy since our NFL draft preview show, where we talked about the rookies coming into the league. How about rookie Bo Nix, quarterback for the Denver Broncos? He's only owned in 10% of fantasy football leagues. Last week, he was 19 of 27 for 206 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had 8 rushes for 9 yards and a touchdown, and maybe someone got tired of hanging on to Caleb Williams of the Chicago Bears. He was 20 of 29 for 2 TDs with a quarterback rating of 126, and he ran the ball 5 times for 34 yards. Hey, those guys I'd all be picking up that we've mentioned, putting them on our team or on our bench. And I'll tell you what, maybe you're one of those guys that needs a good kicker this week. We really like Cario Santos again. He's going to go out to England. He's going to be playing against the Jacksonville Jaguars. They like to kick the ball out there. Everybody goes crazy because they love soccer. So Cario Santos would be a good kicker. Hey, maybe you're one of those guys that needs a good defense. I'll tell you what, if I was you, I'd go out and get me some Houston Texans against the New England Patriots. Houston Texans are only owned in 35% of fantasy football leagues. I also like the Philadelphia Eagles against the Cleveland Browns. The Giants had a ton of sacks against Cleveland, and Philly's going to get a ton of sacks against Cleveland also. Well, that's it for the Week 6 Waiver Wire Report. I'm Buster Brown. The show is called Redemption Rehab. Good luck.